Welcome to a special edition of the Impact Equation. We're delighted to be working with our friends at 100x Impact Accelerator on this new series, Scaling Tomorrow's Social Unicorns. Join us as we dive into a 4-part series featuring 6 trailblazing social entrepreneurs who are transforming their communities around the world. 100x is based at the London School of Economics, and applications are open for the next cohort this September. Find out more at 100ximpact.org.
Today, we're thrilled to be joined by Richa Gupta, an educator-turned-social entrepreneur who is transforming education for vulnerable children. Richa is the co-founder and CEO of Labhya, an Indian non-profit impacting over 2.4 million children through social emotional learning programs. Recognized globally, Richa has earned accolades including Forbes 30 Under 30 in Asia, is one of 17 individuals globally chosen by the UN and UN Youth Office to lead and represent the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And she also serves on the UNICEF India board and recently spoke at the World Bank. In what will excite both of our daughters, Labhya's work was recently celebrated by Selena Gomez. In this episode, we'll explore how Richa is reshaping education, the power of social emotional learning, and what it takes to drive large-scale change. Richa, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Adam. That's very gracious of you, and I'm very, very excited to be in conversation today.
So Richa, perhaps we can begin by taking us back and giving us a sense of your background, upbringing, and why you decided to dedicate your life to education and impact.
Absolutely. So this is going to be a bit of a long story, but I'll try to keep it interesting. As you know, I'm a teacher turned entrepreneur. I started teaching as a volunteer when I was 16 years old. And so pretty much out of school, that was one of the things I became extremely passionate about very early on in life. Spending time with children helped me learn a lot about my own self. So it was much more of a selfish endeavor than anything to do with helping kids. And I think in that journey is when I basically realized that there's a big difference between me teaching and children actually learning. I realized that a lot of the children that I worked with, who mainly came from low-income classrooms, experienced a lot of challenges outside of the classrooms in their homes and in the communities that they lived in, which was not covered or talked about within the classrooms. And this included violence, trauma, exposure to all kinds of challenges, even abuse in some cases. For me, knowing that all of this was happening and still pretending like we are in class to somehow just do math and science and learn English was just not settling enough. And it really made me question my purpose as an educator. I think a turning point for me in that sort of decade of teaching was, unfortunately, in my journey, I lost 2 of my students. One was to community violence, and another one was to a disease that I had recovered from when I was a child. And I think beyond how I felt about it, I saw how it really affected the rest of my 12-year-olds in the classroom, their parents, the community.
How old were you when you went through this?
I was in my early 20s, so I was a very, very new educator. And I think that really pushed me to think more deeply about my purpose.
Tell us more about the circumstances. So how far apart were those 2 tragic incidents?
Yeah.
How did your class react? How did you need to respond? What happened?
Yeah. So both of my students, both of them were girls. And they were not quite far apart. This was almost a year apart. And I remember actually one of the students who passed away due to an illness. This was right after summer vacations, so after summer break. And before summer break, we actually had a debrief with her in the classroom because we found out that there were some behavioral challenges. And so we were sitting with her friends and I was trying to coach them through the challenge. And it felt like, okay, hopefully post-summer things will be different. And the first day we came back, we heard from the parents that she will not be coming to school. And we said, why? Is there an issue? Are you moving? Are you migrating? And they said, no, this happened a few days ago. And then I think what was really telling for me and very, very disappointing was watching the rest of my 12-year-olds in the classroom. I think in an age where they only should worry about what to eat next or who to play with and things that they fight about, and homework, they had to now have a full think about what would happen if they didn't see another one of their friends in classroom next, or if they were next. And what was even more disappointing was, in the larger scheme of things, none of this ever came out. It was not a big newspaper article. No one talked about it, mainly because of where my kids came from.
Richa, before we get into the founding story of Labhya, can you share with us a bit more about your background and why you got into teaching in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up as an only child, and I had both of my parents were slightly older than most of my friends' parents, because they had me when they were in their 40s, which is really uncommon in the community that I live in. It's also very uncommon to be an only child in India. And so a lot of my growing up had a lot to do with caregiving to both of my parents as I grew older, and also a lot of introspection and just being an introvert at large. I really felt out of place in school. And that if you talk to me about school, I think the first feeling that comes to me is always feeling out of place and feeling like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm not good at anything. Everyone's either good at sports or, teaching or learning, etc. And I'm not. But I always found myself to be intuitive and creative, but lacking a community. And I think when I started teaching, which is very much by chance, which was in university, and I just happened to be talking to somebody who was running like a 4-person small grassroots organization, trying to volunteer in a refugee camp, actually. And they just took me along, and I just automatically sort of got connected with the children, started talking to them, started playing with them. I realized that maybe children are my community. They don't judge, and they didn't care what I was doing, how shy I was. They just came up to me and started jumping around, and we started playing. And that's how I discovered that maybe I like to be around kids. They teach me a lot more about myself. They're curious.
If you could share more about what's inspired you, or perhaps who's inspired you, or perhaps books or readings that have inspired you, it would be wonderful to hear more about that, Richa.
My grandmother actually inspired me to be more entrepreneurial. She actually was the one who gifted me my first big novel when I was in school. And that's how I started to learn how to read, and I started to love reading. Also, she was always an entrepreneurial person. So I remember stories of how when she got married to my grandfather, she was not literate. And so my grandfather used to encourage her to read, and he would say, if you read this one book in English, we'll take you for a picnic. And then they would go for a picnic once she had read, and she helped set up my parents' careers. She was an only parent for a long time because my grandfather passed away. She settled my parents abroad. And so I think all of that was always inspiring. I think that pushed me to somehow, I think in a way, read more, read about education, and get interested.
So you were at university. Did you then retrain as a teacher? How did you then get into teaching?
So I got into teaching firstly through volunteering, and then I also did something called as a Teach for India fellowship, which is a 2-year program where you get to teach full time in a public school in India, and they train you to become a teacher. So that was my only formal intro into teaching.
Fantastic. Well, we just interviewed Brett Wigdorts on the podcast, who was the driving force behind Teach First and inspired things like Teach for India. So, and we spoke to Josh McAllister, who is also a social entrepreneur that came through that program too. So it's fantastic to speak to ever more Teach First, Teach For, whoever fellows. So walk us through forward from there then, Richa. So you're on Teach for India. You had these experiences, these really formative experiences of tragedy in the classroom. What was the next step? What happened next?
So in this journey, when all of this happened, I was very confused. I definitely wanted to do something much more beyond teaching my kids, even though I loved doing that, and I still do. In that journey, I actually came across 2 of my co-founders, Vedant and Malika, both truly amazing people who actually pushed this whole of how Labhya came together. And this is an interesting story. Malika was in her 10th year in a corporate. She's a chartered accountant. She was trying to find purpose in the daily sort of rut of what she was doing. My third co-founder, Vedant, had quit school to start his own startup, which was doing really well. And he started to sort of go to therapy and understand his own childhood trauma and started questioning what should be done to reverse any of that. And actually, we all met in a rural immersion program in India where they select 36 individuals randomly from all walks of life, and they take you to a remote village in India. They take away your phone, they take away your wallet, and you have to live there for 15 days at the grace of the people who live in the village. And so we borrowed houses to stay in, we got together, we became friends first, and that's where the idea of Labhya came along, then started to answer the question, what is the real purpose of education? Because we were all grappling with that in our different ways.
Okay, so take us in the room. So you're in the village. What are you doing during that 15 days where you're making friends? And then take us through the debate. Like, what were the different positions? How did you get to Labhya as the outcome?
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting because we all came from very, very different backgrounds. I was a hardcore educationist. Vedant was a hardcore for-profit startup, cutthroat, hustle. Malika was from a corporate background, but she was feeling a lot of sort of gap in her own value system and the work that she was doing. And she herself was going through a big mental health crisis at the time because she had worked all of these years, spent most of her youth studying for this really big exam, doing well financially, and still feeling that gap or that void. So we all came together at a very vulnerable space in life. And I think the debate was less of a debate, I think more of a catharsis, I would say, getting together and sharing our experiences of where we were. I think what was very, very clear to us was that the work has to begin with children, and it has to be beyond foundational numeracy and literacy. I think we became very clear very quickly that while the world keeps focusing on foundational numeracy and literacy being the way that children move out of poverty and move out of adversity, what we are missing is the bottom of the iceberg, right? So the top is what everyone sees, but the bottom is where the trauma exists. The bottom is where the challenges exist, the emotional distress exists. And we also saw that systemically, from my own experience of being in public schools, there was really no mechanism for children to deal with any of this or to even talk about it. And I think we aligned on a lot of that. Vedant and Malika, with their own lived experiences, aligned with that in their own way. And that's how the idea of Labhya was born initially.
Richa, thank you so much for sharing. So talk to us about the scale of the problem that you're seeking to address. Let's get into the meat of it in that case.
Yes. So shortly after we started, we realized that this problem is actually much larger than we expected it to be. Over 1 billion children across the world experience what is known as multidimensional poverty, which means that this is poverty that goes beyond just financial distress or lack of financial support. This means experience of shame, experience of unsafe living environments, not eating safe foods, not growing in a safe environment, both for girls and boys in all their diversity. And all of that together creates a big burden on children, right? Every day, our children experience this burden, and it looks in the form of, being angry, being irritable, not being focused on studies, being rebellious, etc. And when this feeling is not addressed, it compounds over the years, and it compounds into larger problems like our children being less employable, mental health issues as they grow older, more infractions, criminal records, or risky behavior, addiction. And all of this has really just compounded because of those little feelings that children harbor every single day, which go unaddressed. And that's the problem that we then set out to solve. In India's context, most of our vulnerable children go to public schools, and which is why we decided specifically to work in public schools so that we could systemically solve for this problem.
And by public schools, you mean not private schools. In the UK, we talk about public schools strangely as some of the more elite, more private spaces. Anyway, that's obviously a huge and tremendous problem and rooted in your own personal experience, of course, as well. Talk us through the founding of the organization. How did it come about? Why did you call it Labhya? And then, how did you get going?
So when we started Labhya, we were clear on two things. One is that we will work only at scale. While we are very, very excited by the work that happens one-to-one between a teacher and a child, between a facilitator and a participant. We were all really driven by the fact that this problem is at a systemic level, so it has to be solved at a systemic level. The second thing we were very clear about is that we will only work with vulnerable children. And while emotional well-being support and mental health is very important for children across all socioeconomic strata, our heart is with children who go to government schools, who go to public schools. And I think that's the value system that we began with. And that's where we started thinking about what we wanted to do with Labhya thereafter. On Labhya and what it really means. So Labhya is a Sanskrit word. It means within reach. And we wanted to name the initiative and the organization Labhya because when we started talking to children, we realized that most of our children are convinced that where they come from strongly defines where they will go in life, and it will not be too far. And so we wanted Labhya to ensure that children know that change is within reach, and that's why within reach.
Richa, would you mind sharing with us how you went about determining the solution to a systemic problem, and perhaps take us through the first program that you started with?
I think for us, the journey has been a little bit in reverse. For many nonprofits, typically one pilots a program with a small number of people, and then we figure out that it works, and then we work for years to advocate it to larger systemic bodies like the government. In Labhya's case, it was a total 180. So when we started Labhya in 2017, we did pilot a small program with about 300 children. We saw the power of the work we were doing. It really assured us that we're in the right direction. But what really catapulted our journey and really shifted Labhya's trajectory was in 2018 when a state government in India, a very progressive state government in India, decided to launch an application process. And the application process was for any practitioner or organization, anyone who wanted to work on children's well-being, to come and pitch a program to them that they would then run statewide across each and every government school of the state. And this was a very vague public advertisement, and it had a Gmail ID at the end of it. So a usual person would get very skeptical, but not us. We were a bunch of 20-year-old naive people. So we decided to fill out the proposal, email everything to this email ID, and forget about it. But actually, to our surprise, in the next 3 months, we heard back and we were actually selected as one of the 13 organizations to pitch our program to the then education minister of that state. And so we went in and we pitched our program. We were easily the youngest people in that whole room of 200 people who had come in to, listen to the pitches. We spoke to his advisors. We spoke to the minister. They did their due diligence. We came back from the meeting thinking, firstly, that was not a good way to make friends with other nonprofits, because essentially what we said was, no work has been done yet, and here's why we are different. And secondly, who knows, maybe we will never get selected. But actually, the government took a bet on us. And to our surprise, we actually got an email and a call from them afterwards saying that we want you to start partnering with us to design what is going to be the world's largest in-school well-being program for over 1.2 million children across all public schools of Delhi.
Wow. Having only done it for 300 children, you pitched for 1.2 million.
Yes.
That's incredible. What was it about the pitch that you think did it for you? What was it about the state and about that minister, but also about how you framed the opportunity that you think was the winning component?
Yes, I think a couple of things now in hindsight. I think one, we were just foolish enough to attempt. But I think beyond that, we were not trying to sell a solution to the government. Because we were so open and hungry for the opportunity, we were open to collaborating and co-creating the solution with the government, which was very different from the other people in those rooms who were clearly experts. They were pitching to them, right? But they already came from a mindset of what works, what doesn't work, and this is what we want to do, versus Labhya was there. We are a bunch of young people. We are capable. We will hustle. We will work with you. We'll learn, and we'll create a program that works for our children. I think that really stuck out to the government partner. And of course, they were extremely understanding of where we were coming from. I think as a very progressive education minister, he recognized that actually having young people on the team, making sure that, we could be used for our agility and for our, knack for understanding what's happening very quickly. I think he took a bet on us also. And I remember one of the last sort of formal meetings we had with him in that whole process, they said, okay, so we think you're a good partner and we want you to place 2 people from your team in the government office to start working with us. Who is that person going to be? And at that point, it was me who was teaching, thankfully not in that summer break. It was Malika who was still at her corporate, and it was Vedant who was the first one of all of us to take a plunge and say, I will be full-time. So we said, it's the 2.5 of us who will be in this room making stuff with you. There's literally nobody else in our team. And it worked for them. I think they appreciated the authenticity.
Wow. What an amazing story. So then you've won the sort of contract. What was the process of designing the program? How did you go about it? Who did you work with? Yeah, it sounds amazing.
Yes. So actually how we worked with this government is basically what our model then became. We actually started working with a small group of public school teachers who are master trainers, who we call them now. And these master trainers were actually pulled out of what they were doing. They represented all the districts of the state. And we actually designed the curriculum alongside with them. So we all together, all 40, 45 folks came together. We developed a shared understanding, firstly, of what we meant by children's well-being and social emotional learning, because that can be something that is not very obvious. And it's a very, very new concept that never existed more systemically and so structurally in the public education system of India before that. And so we actually came together to firstly build an understanding, okay, what do we mean by SEL? What will we teach our children? What are the challenges that children in Delhi specifically face? And how can we tackle that through the curriculum? And then we started designing the curriculum, which started to include elements of mindfulness, because we thought that was a great secular practice that could help children be more in the present. We had stories and activities that were basically designed on cliffhangers so that teachers could start asking questions after those stories and generate a big discussion in the classroom. And of course, we had something called as reflection sharing, where children had the opportunity to share how they're feeling, sort of really go back to thinking about feelings, and articulate how they're feeling and turn that into action. So we all designed that together. The program was then launched by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama, that year. And then we were then able to launch the program fully in the classrooms, of course, after piloting it in a few schools, figuring out what was the thing that was not working, gathering feedback from teachers, and then coming back and redoing it.
Richa, would you mind sharing with us a bit more about the impact of that program? Give us a sense of the numbers and the scale that you were able to reach.
So since then, so we partnered with the Delhi government back then. Like I mentioned, we were then working with 1.2 million children across 1,000 schools of Delhi. We then went on to scale that program to 2 more states in the last couple of years. Today, we work with 2.4 million children across 22,000 public schools in partnership with 3 state governments.
Wow.
Talk us through the program in a bit more detail then. As a child receiving this, what do they get? And then how do you understand their progress? What data do you capture?
Yeah.
And then how can you sort of continuously improve the offering as a result as well?
Yes. So every week is structured into mindfulness stories, activities, and reflections. And for a child who walks in, and this is for children from grades K to 8, so kindergarten to 8, so almost 9 years of their school life, first 9 years of their school life, they experience a daily well-being class for 30 minutes every single day, facilitated by a regular public school teacher, a teacher who teaches them math, science, or English, also teaches them well-being. And for a child in the classroom, they start their week with mindfulness. So activities where children are able to just close their eyes and focus on their breath or the sounds around them, mindful eating, mindful walking, mindful scribbling, all sorts of activities that help children just be in the present and leave everything and focus their attention on one thing. And that really helps them focus on not just learning, but also their emotions when they're in trouble or they're feeling uneasy. We then have stories where children listen to a story that is based on their day-to-day life experience. So just like Adam and Rafi were classmates, and one day Adam brought in a really shiny, fancy-looking blue pencil, and Rafi really liked it. So when Adam wasn't looking, Rafi picked the pencil up and put it in his bag. And that's where the story would end. Yeah. And that's where the story would end. So there's no right or wrong at the end of the story. And then there would be questions. If you were Adam, how would you feel when you didn't find your pencil? If you were Rafi and you see your friend scrambling around for his stuff, how would you feel? What would you do? Stuff like that. And the day would really end and the class would really end with, okay, so this is how they would feel. Has this happened to you? And how would you feel if you were in their position? Also go back home and share the story with your siblings, with your family, and let's come back tomorrow and reflect more. So that's what one story kind of looks like for children. And we were very intentional about designing something that was based on children's day-to-day lives and not like a giraffe talking to an elephant, because I feel while that is amazing for children's creativity, but to really build relevance was extremely important to us. And then we have activities that are designed to help children really communicate how they're feeling about each other. So Rafi and Adam would draw a portrait of each other and write 5 things that they love about their other partner in that, and then gift it to you, right? So I think stuff like that would really help children communicate how they're feeling, build stronger relationships, and become more resilient. And at the end of the week, children would then close it all out by sharing what they felt about doing the activities, about listening to the stories, and what action are they taking now that they have this new understanding of their own feelings.
Amazing, Richa. So what's your ambition? If we fast forward to the end state, where are you trying to go? And then perhaps we can work backwards to today and what the next steps are for you in going towards it.
Yes. So our goal is very clear. Our goal is to impact 30 million children by 2030 through our programs. And all of this has to be in partnership with state governments.
And do you want to do that just within India or in other countries as well?
Currently in India, but we are very open to exploring opportunities. In India itself, we have 190 million children enrolled in public schools. So this would be critical mass for a national scale-up in India as we plan it.
So the aim is 30 million children by 2030. What's the game plan, Richa?
So the game plan is threefold. First is to continue to partner with more state governments. We already have partnered with 3. We have some wonderful, almost 6-year-long partnerships that have continued to go on now. And we feel that our end game there is government adoption, that at some point the government will adopt the program. They have already allocated budgets to the program. They own the program. They name the program. So all of that is already in place, and we will slowly move out of those systems. The second thing in the game plan is to continue to create more evidence to prove that, quite simply, when children are more regulated, they learn better. And the third is to bring in more catalytic philanthropy into children's mental health and well-being, which is a very big gap right now.
Richa, from my experience, sometimes social entrepreneurs can have the most incredible impact and evidence of impact, but there are so many other aspects of persuasion, particularly in public kind of contexts of politicians who've got other things to consider, or kind of policy officials. Can you share with us the other sides of this in terms of how you go about persuading public officials to adopt Labhya?
Absolutely. This is an interesting question because this is the hardest part of the work. Even the RCT, which has felt like an open heart surgery, has not been as difficult as making sure that this becomes a public-led, a government-led program, right? So for us, what we have learned is as follows. The first has been that governments need to really own the program. So as we engage more state governments, we actually make sure that our current state partners champion the program to other state governments rather than Labhya championing the program to other state governments, and feel proud that this is something that they have done, that they have mandated 30 minutes every single day, including government budgets, for children's well-being, and are pioneering that kind of innovation in the education system. The second is that while it seems very fancy and you sometimes feel like you're working with a monolithic sort of institution when you talk about governments really are just people, and people at different levels, people who have different areas of experience, different years of experience, and also power dynamics. And so while it is very fancy to work with the high-level officials, the very important people, what often gets missed out, and this is what we call change management, is the mid-level management, the people who are the true experts in the area, who have stayed in those departments for an average of 30 years, have a lot of agency and intention, but maybe never had the support to do this kind of work. So we actually work with them to build ownership in that strata to make sure that the program continues to live beyond Labhya.
A phrase springs to mind, Risha, which is according to the principle that it's amazing what can be achieved if no one cares who takes the credit.
Yes.
Which seems to be very, very sort of necessary here. So, Risha, I'm keen to understand a bit more about your reflections as a social entrepreneur. When you look back at the young Risha, what advice would you give to people that need to be prepared for battle? Because it's a wonderful conversation and it's warm, but we know how hard it can be at times. So help people at the beginning of their journey to get ready.
That's a heavy question. It is quite challenging. I think especially as a young entrepreneur and a young female entrepreneur, it is exponentially more challenging because when we started Labhya, we did not have social capital. I did not have gray hair. I'm seriously praying for some. And we maybe lacked the gravitas that most people expect from entrepreneurs. And I think that made the journey slightly more difficult than for other entrepreneurs in the field who maybe come in from corporate experience or move into social entrepreneurship in their 40s when they have some life experience. And so balancing the humility of not knowing anything while still being ambitious was one of the most tough things that I think we have been able to do. I think we've been able to do that. And that has been tough. I think with that comes the challenge of trying to work with governments. I remember we had this funny story at Labhya where in the beginning, when we were trying to get people to take us seriously in the government departments, we would carry extension cords with us, those points would have multiple plug points, so that we would plug it in one of the corners of the office. And then when somebody had to charge their phone, which happens a lot, they would have to come and talk to us. And then we would start building a relationship from there and, and organically start to fix that relationship. So I think those are the days that we learned how to do this work. We really learned it by doing it. But it's been challenging to surpass the perception of young people and be taken seriously over the years.
Amazing. Good for you for having that ingenuity and that can-do spirit. We'd love to know a bit about your relationship with 100X. What's inspired you to apply and what has been useful about the program and the relationship there?
So we applied to 100X at a very interesting year at Labhya. We were just sort of playing with the idea of doing this really big study. We had this track record of working with governments. We were sure where we wanted to be, but we didn't know how and what that would look like. And we applied to 100X feeling, okay, there is the scale support, there is mentorship. It seems like 100X really values the ambition that we hold, and they might value the track record that we have. And they might also understand that we don't know everything. And so we applied. It was an interesting process where we had a short application. We had a quick call with Fan from 100X, who was the head of Impact, which is very, very warm, actually, and much different than what we were expecting. And then a whole process where they actually helped us diagnose our own organization, our own strengths and areas of development, something that we actually didn't have the time to do otherwise. And then the process, and then when we got to know that we were selected, that was incredible. And that's how we sort of felt about the whole process in general before getting into the cohort.
And what did you take away? How did it impact your sort of conception of scale and your intentions to get to 30 million?
So 100x has been very, very helpful in helping us define two things. One, in defining a very clear strategy to scale in terms of working with governments and how that would look like. Also talking about our end game. What is the end of our partnership with the government? What does that look like, etc.? And I think the second thing that they have really helped us define is how we understand and talk about our impact. Now that we are almost at the end of our study, 100x is also helping us figure out how we can articulate the work that we do in a simpler way, so that more and more people come in and take a bet on us. And it was actually after 100x that we had so many funders take a larger bet on us over the years and really helped us accelerate our journey to the 30 million to 2030.
And I saw you recently just had a really big funder sign on. Do you want to share a bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So the cat is out of the bag now. This has been in the works. So Iconic Impact is an organization that has put together what is the world's largest philanthropic commitment to youth well-being. It's a $200 million fund still in the making, and 24 organizations were selected through a rigorous due diligence process to basically support youth mental well-being across the world. And Labhya became the only Indian organization to be a part of the cohort. So we're very, very grateful and excited. This is a multi-year commitment, which is amazing and really helps us build on to our goal in a much more sustainable way.
We haven't really asked the obvious question. Is your funding model entirely philanthropic, or does the state also support you and pay for the program?
No. So you're correct. When we partner with state governments, we sign a non-financial MOU, wherein the government does pay for the programming. So they pay for the teachers being trained, their allowances, the books being printed. So all the program costs are covered by the government. And Labhya basically raises philanthropic capital to pay for our people and for our operations.
Lovely. Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time together, Richa. I think that's the last question for me, and maybe Adam, you ask some others, but what's the future of social emotional learning? How are you going to leverage technology to improve your scale and improve the quality of the work? And also maybe what's next for you as a social entrepreneur too?
Absolutely. I think this is a very exciting time for social emotional learning. With the kind of evidence that we are seeing come around, I think it will become a very big priority in global education in general in the coming years, with more complexities that children continue to face, like climate change, increased violence, all sorts of challenges. Emotional well-being has to be an important part of the experience of childhood for every single child across the world. And I think that is the future of education and social emotional learning. With respect to technology, we have a love and hate relationship with technology. We think it will really enable us to understand in real time what is the quality of our classrooms, how our teachers are feeling about it, and how we can improve the delivery of our programs much more at speed. And I think technology will also help us build more ownership towards data around children's well-being within the government systems, because we'll be able to easily mechanize a lot of that. So that's how we see integration of technology in our work currently.
And just a final question for me, Richa. Other than saying a massive thank you, is there anything that you would ask or request of our audience that can help either directly or indirectly in your mission?
Yes, absolutely. Firstly, please focus on, if you have children around you, if you have your nieces, nephews, your own children, or people that you teach, young people that you work with, please check in on them and focus on their well-being. It's a very big marker and a part of success for young people to feel emotionally safe and to have one trusted adult in their own lives. And if you're able to, please contribute to Labhya's mission and help us out in the work that we're doing.
Amazing. Well, Richa, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure to meet you. And thank you so much for sharing your story and Labhya's story.
Amazing story. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Adam, Richa, what another incredible story, another incredible female young entrepreneur who's doing incredible things at scale. What are your reflections?
I mean, what is going on at our friends at 100X? They've got some really fantastic social entrepreneurs. First of all, a big shout out to them. A few reflections. The first is teach first, teach for all. Wow, where does it end? Second, I just found that there's something very beautiful to remind us that even out of, I guess, difficult ordeals and challenges, incredible things can happen. I was particularly struck by Richa sharing the difficulties that her and her co-founders were having at the inception point of Labhya and what became of it, and how their vulnerability and challenges actually became the seed. And it brought to mind the phrase, no mud, no lotus, which I particularly like. And I guess the other part is also reflecting on the Neha conversation, which was there can be scale solutions to systemic problems and the role of government in delivery. And I'd love to perhaps think more about how Britain can learn from India in the way that social entrepreneurs are clearly partnering with the state to great effect. Obviously, it's a sample size of 2.
Yeah.
But again, there's probably a lot that we can learn.
Yeah, but that story of the education system of the state putting out a tender for innovation and then taking a bet on untested.
And a Gmail address, Rafi, no less. Dominic Cummings would have loved that.
Exactly. It's true. It is true. I was involved in the DFE with an innovation program for children's social care. We basically stole a bunch of money that was going to go nowhere and put a ring around it and said, a pitch for this money is an innovation program. And, that was the idea of it, was to spark innovation in that way. I think, it was very bureaucratic in how it was managed and how the money was deployed. It sounded like, this was a little bit more Dragon's Den vibe from what Richa was saying, which is amazing and a bit, unusual relative to my experience of government bureaucracy. And look what is enabled. So, credit to that minister and to that government for doing that. I'd say, for me, the personal story is really the thing that really pulls me into what Richa's talking about into Labhya. The fact that she'd been through such horrendous tragedy with these 2 children in her classroom who passed away, with her as a teacher having to manage that and understanding that the education just falls away when children feel unsafe or unsupported or their well-being is knocked in any way, but particularly that's such a stark way. What an incredibly challenging, horrendous thing to happen, and what a beauty and blessing there is that she has turned that tragedy into something so inspiring.
And daily well-being classes for 2.4 million children. Wow. We probably need a well-being class for you and I, Rafi, every day.
That's definitely right. Well-being parenting class for sure. Adam, lovely to chat as ever. Thank you to Richa, to 100X, and until next time on The Impact Equation.
Until next time.